So this week's podcast tip of the week is podcast hosting platforms.
No clearance.
If you want to start a podcast, the way to get it to spread on everything like Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all that good stuff, is to sign up for podcast hosting platforms such as Spotify for creators. When we started, that shit used to be called Anchor. Buzzsprout, Podbean, all them type of things. Those are where you would upload your podcast to and spread it out to these different platforms that will play it, such as Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. But those are for the audio people. You know, that's just the way to get it. It makes you an RSS feed, and that's what gets sent to these other platforms so you can spread your podcast. But yeah, that's the tip of the week. Make sure you sign up for a good podcast hosting platform. Specifically Spotify for creators. That's the best one right now.
Yeah, so we now Jay, I know you were saying it's for audio, but as we've been playing with lately, you can just upload your video to Spotify, and it will post on the podcast platform as well. It will do audio and video.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, I know a lot of people, kind of focus on the YouTube side of it and making good video content. I truly believe there's still a really good space if you just want to do audio. Like I wouldn't like, don't stop yourself from just making great audio quality podcasts or just a great audio show. Using the podcast hosting platforms to upload your stuff. And one thing about the podcast hosting platforms, when you first start, be patient, especially with putting it on Apple. At least with Anchor, at least with Spotify for creators, it takes a minute for the Apple RSS feed to upload. It's on damn near 2 weeks. It takes a minute to get that started, so be patient with them on that end. Of course, it's going to be right away for Spotify. But I know a lot of people, get their audio podcast straight from Apple Podcasts. So just be patient with the Apple Podcast. And if you don't want to be patient, you can actually create your RSS feed on Apple, and upload it that way if you want. But I would just say, just wait, because once it's all set up, it's going to be immediate. It's just that initial episode takes a little bit of time.
I think it even still takes a little bit for Apple, like maybe like an hour.
Maybe so, yeah.
Like maybe 2 hours. Like I think it's an hour for Spotify, an hour for Apple. Like if you upload it at 11, it will be up at 12.
Which I feel like that's not that big of a delay. Like
no, not really. I mean, you're not gonna listen to it right away anyway. So
right.
I will say, if you can start a podcast, start audio first. Learn how to talk on the mic. Worry about the banter and how you communicate with one another. Because if you have that and then go over to the video stuff, if you try to do it all at the same time, it gets really overwhelming. As we learned with the podcast here, that there was points where we're like,
unless you pay, especially if you're doing it on your own, like unless you want to pay for a team, I'm sure that'll work out. If you do need video editing, you can actually hit us up. You can hit up Jay. He'll edit your podcast for a little price. You feel me? If you do want that end of it, but it is recommended. I agree with you, Jay. Zoning in on the audio first, I think, is very important.
Yeah, always start with good audio. If you got good audio, you're gonna have a good podcast in the long run when it gets to visually.
Indeed, and that is our podcast tip of the week.
No clearance.